Brother K. December 12, 2017. My name is Brother K. Sisters and brothers in incarnation, before express myself, let us together have a moment of silence and peace. Silence. Today, I would like to continue what I have been telling you for many years about autonomy, freedom, in a slightly different way, because it is adapted to the times you are living in at the moment. A few years ago, I spoke to you about freedom and autonomy concerning what was happening within this body itself, concerning both your thoughts and emotions, making you discover and live that there is an inner world. And that this inner world in certain circumstances, gives you to see something other than what concerns your life and this world. There has indeed been for many of you the possibility of living multiple states of consciousness, multiple experiences. Today, the freedom I am about to talk to you about is a little different. Because that freedom is directly linked and in resonance with the presence of your body of eternity and your supra-consciousness. Whether you have a clear or fleeting perception of it does not change anything about this truth and this reality right here, in the world where you are still living. Some of you have noticed that consciousness is no longer so formally attached and ingrained within this body. Your work, the work of the earth, confederation and the light and grace now of the igneous fire, places you in unusual situations, states and experiences that are still unknown to many of you who have been liberated alive for many years. The undocking, if I can say, of consciousness in relation to this body is not a flight from this body, but rather the final and terminal result of the appearance and emergence of your supra-consciousness in place of the ordinary consciousness no longer being subjected to this body nor to this body. Without going as far as certain exercises or manifestations common in the East, especially among yogas, it is undeniable that many of you see through various manifestations, through various perceptions and feelings, the presence in you and around you of something different. I am not talking here about energy or vibration, but really and concretely about the change in the location of consciousness right here in this world. To live the body of eternity, its resynthesis, its manifestation and its effects is one thing, which many of you who have followed the vibratory process of expansion of consciousness, have realized. But as you know, there are countless brothers and sisters who have not yet had the availability of their being to live the mechanisms you have lived. You have also been informed that from now on the process is called expansion of consciousness, since consciousness is vibration, no longer need these supports. Quite simply because the igneous fire has impelled in you an important relaxation of identification with the body as well as the functioning of your ordinary consciousness that has been directly imprinted until now in the body. Today it is different, because of the very fact of the collective process, even if it does not yet concern you, where consciousness is to be found living, in part, within this eternity right here in this world. Beyond the perceptions and mechanisms of implementation of the spiritual senses, it is given to each human consciousness incarnated today to live directly the access to this different consciousness by the very action of the igneous fire, and this, independently of your openings whatever they are or of your previous lived experiences. This is really and concretely the final phase of the ascension of the earth that is taking place, as you know, in these days, these hours, these weeks that are taking place before you. The penetration of the igneous fire, whether you have felt it or not yet, has obviously modified what you could call the collective unconscious, not at the level of predation lines, of course, but at the level not of egregore, but of the intensity of the presence of light on this earth as in your bodies of flesh, in your cells, but also from now on even within the organizational structures of this world, formally replacing the last elements of fragments remaining within the control of the human mind, linked above all to what has been called habits, repetitions and, above all, the habits of matter. The dimension of your body of eternity, perceived or not, as well as your supra-consciousness, has no connection with this carbonized world except during those years when there was juxtaposition of your ordinary consciousness and supra-consciousness, or, if you prefer, superposition of the ephemeral and the eternal. A number of elements experienced by the Earth itself since November of this year 2017, have also allowed the release of what you could call the electromagnetic and gravitational forces corresponding to what is taking place on a physical plane on the Earth's mantle and in the Earth's sky. I will not come back to this, because many elements have been communicated to you or have been seen and analyzed by you. The important thing is to notice this relaxation with the body, and this can be seen in countless ways. First of all, at the very level of the so-called physiological functioning of your body. Everything that was essential needs and not impulses, everything that concerned the maintenance of life on this level, is now for many of you, extremely modified, with the implication that all these vital and physiological needs are reduced. And this rarefaction of needs and impulses shows you in a formal way that the preeminence of what is called the forces of predation in you, linked to the brain called reptilian, find a favorable outcome today through this kind of relaxation of consciousness itself concerning your body, but also now your own history. I will, of course, pass on what has been lived by many of you concerning the disappearances, the moments of injunction of the light when it seemed to you, in a fleeting way, not to be able to continue any activity whatsoever or any thought whatsoever. But always remember that on this earth there are many brothers and sisters who have not lived through this, and yet today they're able to live in the same conditions of relaxation of the attachment of the ordinary consciousness to this body. That is, the reality of the body of eternity, even if it is not seen and perceived, is felt through the presence of your eternity consciousness anyway. This can be translated into many experiences as well as dreams, and I believe that the commander of the ancients has been jubilant to hear the testimonies and dreams lived in recent months. All of them, without exception, correspond, if I may say so, not only to the eruption of the light into your ordinary consciousness, but above all, to the appearance of this supra-consciousness. Do not forget that supra-consciousness, even if it has a vehicle called the body of eternity, is independent of that body of eternity, which nevertheless belongs to you in the sense that you could still hear it on this earth. Supra-consciousness animated by igneous fire of course conveys the spirit and the word, having and leading as an immediate corollary, and which it is permissible to observe with evidence, whatever your current position. Namely and beyond the sensations of the body of eternity, beyond the visual perception, beyond the perceptions linked to the new senses, supra-consciousness will already and independently impel and impulse any vibrate perception, samadhi moments, peace moments, joy moments that do not answer any cause or any satisfaction within this world. And this, independently, I repeat once again, of your vibratory circumstances and your positioning within eternity. There is, at the level of what is happening today, no belief to establish, no exercise to practice, but really to observe that thought is followed by consciousness, and the consciousness is now supraluminous. This has as a corollary of form, I would say, of immediacy of everything that happens on your ephemeral screen. A fear will be brought to life by a feared event. A joy will immediately be actualized by something that will give you to be in joy, even if nothing is seen and even if nothing is perceived. The first consequence of this is to lead you into a form of observation, not of your life or your history or your body, and even less of the energies or vibrations, but much more to see for yourself that there really and concretely exists an unknown part of yourself that works, I would say, much better than your usual functioning. Giving you and resulting, for those who live nothing at the level of this body of eternity, in particular passages. These particular passages are translated into a sense of unreality about this world. So of course, if fear is present, it can translate into a need to become established, to take root and to regain, as you commonly say, your minds. Of course, what is happening is exactly the opposite of what you might think. If there are moments of unreality in you, of any kind, if there are difficulties in you to fall asleep or wake up in the morning, if there is a perception of something different without being able to see it, feel it or even express it, it is up to you to take advantage of these moments to do nothing. It is up to you, at such times, to let this supra-consciousness work. Not to give you to see something of the body of eternity that you do not perceive, but much more to allow you to experience really and concretely, what has been called unconditioned joy or joy without object, which today, you have understood it does not depend on any prerequisite at the vibral level, energetic or on any positioning of your consciousness. Freedom in relation to the body is expressed precisely by freedom and the emanation of supraconsciousness within this world. I have told you that whether you are awake, or released or asleep, does not change anything that is happening to the very experience of your consciousness. It is also possible to observe a need to make peace, that is, to forgive, to think quite unexpectedly about very distant events where your conduct has not been adequate. What is brought back to your memory is simply the illumination of supraconsciousness giving you to relive in some way, an element of your life, not to solve it, not just to live a past emotion, but much more to verify for yourself the anomaly that occurred at that time without any guilt and leading you simply by the reminiscence, to understand and therefore to overcome and experience the situation you have lived in the past, not to relive it from the same perspective, but directly from peace. The actions of supraconsciousness are innumerable and partly join the injunctions of light experienced by those of you who perceive the vibrations. The consequences are almost identical in any case as far as your consciousness itself is concerned. Relaxation to the body, relaxation to vital and physiological needs, relaxation also of certain personality characteristics that could be related to fear, but which almost constantly translate into the need to protect oneself and thus to practice a certain form of predation in one way or the other. You also notice that your activity becomes different, that you often manage to accept without understanding it events and situations that would have previously made you angry or that would have mobilized your consciousness in order to solve, improve or understand. Supraconsciousness realizes by itself in your life, even without perceiving its energies and vibration, a mechanism that you know well and that is called synchronicity. It is as if a mathematical logic were to be set up, in a way, in the course of events in your life, and this in an increasingly extensive way. Several examples for this. I think of a particular situation, a particular person. The person materializes by telephone or rings your doorbell. You're thinking about a situation and something you should do that you have not done. The thing comes to you by a phone call or by a letter that confirms that you have to take care of it. You therefore notice in an increasingly easy way, this synchronicity of your thoughts and consciousness and also the events that take place on the screen of this world and this, as well on the material, societal, relational level in the broadest sense in the common of your activities. This relaxation of the formal bond and identification with the body and the attachment of consciousness to this body is also experienced in different ways. Sometimes it seems to you to reason differently, to have a profoundly different logic, to be less emotional, or yet sometimes to experience extremely intense emotions that are much more intense than usual, but that never last and never disturb the body. Emotions and mind themselves become, in a way, decoupled from any action on the body. It can also give you, beyond any vibratory mechanism, feelings of floating or stopping any possibility of action, preferably as soon as the sun sets wherever you are on Earth. It also represents for you who do not experience vibrations a form of injunction from the consciousness of your supraconsciousness, to be in truth what you are and no longer what you believe in any way. It is in this way, thanks to this time that remains to be covered, that during these few weeks that have just passed and that are now passing, that an extremely large number of you have realized, not what you are in eternity, but that everything that concerns your life, like this world, was not entirely in harmony, was not quite the ideal dreamed or thought to be lived. This can sometimes lead to a form of disgust or discomfort with regard to this world regarding everything that is revealed, in this period, in a completely official way. Giving you not a discomfort but an even greater feeling of unreality and falsification. The words are false, the images are false, I have already had the opportunity to express myself at length. But today, you see in different ways, and this can be disturbing because it does not immediately offer you something to replace it because you do not perceive the vibrations or energy and even less the body of eternity and even less grace. at that moment can be born, and I warn you, some of you have lived it, a certain form of despair or even anger about what other members of your family, other brothers and sisters you know and who may not have asked anything from anyone, and yet are in a lightness and joy that does not inhabit you in these moments of despair, doubt or anger, not to see the changes. And it is precisely through this form of denial of anger or negotiation that you also live, for many of you, your individual shock, thus preceding the collective shock of humanity. And this is an evil, I would say, for a good, because it is through what you have to overcome, through your despair, but also through moments of peace and lucidity like no other, that the hesitations and oscillations of what you believe you're and what you are, emerge and reveal themselves spontaneously. The most difficult thing to do at first is to remain calm, not to enter into an unrestrained quest for light, whatever it may be, through concepts, ideas or practices, but rather to remain where you are and observe, in the most honest way possible, what is happening on the screen of your consciousness, even if you cannot yet really call it supra-consciousness, as long as your body of eternity has not become somehow sensitive, which will soon happen to many of you who have not been living these energy and vibration processes present for 30 years. And it is precisely thanks to these oscillations and imbalances that the truth can be achieved. The truth doesn't need you either. You can't take it, in the same way that you can't control anything as long as you think you can control it. The only effective control of your life, from now on and will become more and more evident, is the action of grace, the state of grace and becoming like children again, not caring about anything. Not because you decide to neglect anything, but because consciousness itself, in its alchemy between eternal consciousness and ephemeral consciousness, gives it to you to live whether you like it or not. This is very encouraging because it means that whatever the constant procrastination and changes of posture for those brothers and sisters who doubt, who are afraid and who do not live the formal proof of the body of eternity, is being appeased precisely by the possibility that the supraconscious consciousness has, if I may say so, to follow your thoughts, intentions, actions and movements. It is precisely in this that you must take advantage of moments of confusion, anger, denial, unreality or peace. As soon as your balance seems to change, in one way or another, it is at this moment that you must consider that this is an injunction of the light, even if it is very subtle for you, in order to position yourself in the silence. Silence means, above all, of course, to put your senses at rest. And I am talking about the ordinary senses, in other words, putting your eyes at rest, closing your eyes, cutting off any noise or sound if possible. Then let this work of occultation of the senses continue, which will necessarily occur and will most often begin with tingling phenomena at the extremities. Also by a difficulty in maintaining a thought. Do not panic if at first it seems to you that your thoughts are turning in all directions and even hinder the rest of the senses that I have just recommended. Just let these thoughts, even crazy ones, hatch and disappear. And I would even say that the more thoughts that have no connection with each other, the more you have the possibility of no longer depending on these thoughts that take place in the moment when you do this silence. You will also notice very quickly, and this, without falling asleep for you, that what could disturb, on the level of the body, in a chronic way or in a purely cyclical way, will also move away from your consciousness. Consciousness will not be replaced at first by a white screen or a black screen corresponding to those, of course, which live the vibratory processes in progress. But what you will see when you return from your rest, however, I am talking about rest voluntarily, it is not about meditating, it is not about asking, it is simply about putting you in this rest there to in a form, I would say embracing what is happening, leading to a change of point of view that will be especially obvious since you will not perceive anything from it by being deprived of meaning, but that you will very quickly notice during your ordinary activities, whatever they may be. Thus you will find that you will be less involved and less carried away by circumstances that previously in your life brought reactions, speeches, judgments or opinions about your life simply, or about situations, about your family members, or in any relationship. Thus you will see for yourself, without experiencing anything of the energetic mechanisms, that something different is taking place within your character, leading you to notice that it becomes smoother. Whatever the colliding sides of certain character traits, these will seem less present, less active. You will also easily notice processes of sedation of painful mechanisms, not corresponding to a medical action of the light, nor of your supraconsciousness, but much more a lightening of this connection between the body and the ordinary consciousness, leading you little by little to understand in life, beyond any vibratory process, that you are not ultimately this body, even if you do not yet know what you are. It is this kind of emptiness that is often compared to peace, which for you, who do not vibrate, will be an essential marker of the installation of your supraconsciousness, of course, but also of the first signs of the sensitive appearance of your body of eternity. I make a small aside now for those of you who live at crowns, the vibrations, or at least one of the crowns. And in particular, the easiest to live with today is the crown of the head. Until now and all these years we have drawn your attention to the stars, to the elementary triangles. I remind you that each of the 12 stars is a spiritual potential, a spiritual meaning linked to your multidimensionality, inscribed in your body of eternity, but also beyond this body of eternity, in what you call the supraconsciousness without body, that is, the infinite presence that confines to the absolute. These meanings have names that we have given you. Of course, these names do not really correspond to what they're on the other side of the veil, but we have given you the points L, O, D, I, M is. The others are part of the Metatron keys that will be communicated to you after Mary's call and before the Grill planet, wherever you are located, in this body of flesh or in the body of eternity, whether you are on the circles of fire or in the open air. It won't make any difference. Some of these spiritual meanings have been evoked, especially by the sister star Terezi concerning, for example, the depth. The same is true for each of the stars. Here again, I remind you, whether you perceive it or not, thinking leads to consciousness. All you have to do is to think about the location of one of these stars, and even in some cases you will feel the location of a star when you notice, at that moment, that something changes irremediably by concerning you precisely the senses. But you will not be able to link this to the ordinary senses, and having no visual reference point, you will only notice the modification of your usual senses where something different is added. There are countless possibilities, and I don't have the opportunity today to deploy all this, because you will easily understand it yourself by living it. The sleep mechanisms I mentioned concern the extremities of the hands and feet, which can sometimes also cause not only needle blows, but also pain that is described as exquisite, in other words, extremely strong pain in the hands or feet, but never lasts. Here again, it is advisable not to look for an explanation or to go and suspect anything abnormal. It is only the work of the igneous fire, which in you, not vibrating, cannot be done from the normal entry points, but is done from the points most accessible to the igneous fire for you, that is to say the extremities, not the head but the hands and feet. This will induce not the perception of another body, but a feeling of numbing tingling of the extremities, and which will progress in the moment when you will be at peace, as I said, and which will give you to live not the body of eternity, but really that your consciousness remains without any further perception of this body and this, in an extremely short time space. This simply means that as you respond to the unreality and this particular form of call of light for you, you will see that the progression of this paresthesia, as you say in the medical environment, will go to the root of the limbs. At that time, and I repeat, in a relatively short time, and in terms of rest, if I may say, or peace, which is not very important, you'll then easily notice that in this state of calm, it will then be more possible, much easier, for you to carry your consciousness simply on a heart, without gesture. I remind you that the gestures that have been communicated by the Archangel Enel for 2 months do not concern those of you who do not experience the vibrations, because they will obtain absolutely nothing by these simple gestures applied to the body. They do not concern you, and I think that Archangel Enel has partly failed to give you this clarification. The best solution, for you brothers and sisters still asleep for a short time, is exactly what I have just explained to you. From the moment you have reproduced a certain number of times, therefore limited, these moments of rest which are imposed by your consciousness and not by the injunction of light, you will notice, beyond the changes that I have also described and which will accompany them, that there is a greater capacity not to be identified with this world, not to be identified with your character, but without knowing or living your eternity. Do not be alarmed by this, and it is precisely this feeling of unreality that will unfailingly lead, at the latest at the moment of Mary's call or Nibia's visibility or even simply of the trumpets, to give you to live, at that moment, the direct perception of your body of eternity. What means that for many of you who are not opposed to the light, it is your choice, it is your freedom to, but who nevertheless live nothing and despair never to live anything, you are offered, since the beginning of November and in these weeks that remain to pass, the possibility of living exactly the same liberation as those who have passed, for the moment, through the wave of life, through the Marial canal or through the structures of vibration. The spiritual senses will come to your consciousness in an increasingly clearer way, since I repeat, whether you are consciousness or not, all the bodies of eternity are present on earth. There is not a single one left at the level of the Sunday. Even those whom you call the disembodied, who had mostly passed into stasis, since the end of the celestial weddings and especially since the liberation of the earth, will also recover this body of eternity, and they will begin to emerge, standing ready to join this earth when the time comes. This is what has been called and misinterpreted and what I named, when I was Jesus, the resurrection of the dead. This resurrection, of course, concerns the last body and does not concern all the other bodies which unfortunately, of course, and fortunately no longer exist, except in a state of dust. But those of you, in your family around you who have suffered losses, will soon find easily, right here on this earth, those you have lost. Certainly, perhaps not in the same body, certainly, perhaps not in the same dispositions of affect or bond, but there will indeed be a certain number of reunions, and this, independently of your becoming after Mary's call. I would also like to clarify this call of Mary, and this was mentioned both by the Archangel Enel and by the Commander of the Elders. There was a perfect chronology. Today, this perfect chronology, as you will see very soon, cannot, for various reasons, respect the chronology that has been given to you. For many reasons. Of course, the last remnants of the occultic forces were well aware of this. The effect of surprise then becoming for the light essential for the conduct of Mary's call. It simply means that the best demonstrations from now on, whether you are awake, asleep or released, are exactly the same. You will have the opportunity to see what I have called the floating of consciousness or unreality, which will last and will no longer simply be a temporary state of call of light or injunction of light, but will grow every minute and exceed 24 hours. At that moment you will easily notice that unreality takes the place of the real of this world, whether you perceive the vibrations or not. At that moment you will know that you are in the period, that is, in the week, that is, an interval of 7 days before the trumpets, or Mary's call, or Nibia, or two of the three, or all three together. This means that for those of you who live the vibrations and already perceive this phenomenon of unreality with intensity, but who translate for you into an ability to live the body of eternity, is not disturbing, but nevertheless unreality is well perceived. You will notice that beyond the moment when the igneous fire becomes more and more intense, that is, when the sun is down, that is, when the solar radiation no longer touches you, and especially at sunset and in the first part of the night, cosmic rays penetrate the earth with an intensity that has never been seen before. It is the intensity of these cosmic rays that has allowed the light to be charged, if I can say, this igneous fire, and to convey to you the spirit of truth, the word, the impersonal, and the choir of angels. You also know that those of you who perceive the song of the soul and the song of the spirit in one of the two ears or both ears, as well as inside the head, see today a change like no other in what is perceived in the consciousness, in the ampulla of the clairaudience and in the Marian canal. It seems to me that this crystalline sound, called crystalline sparkling, and which corresponds to the sixth subplan of what is called the netta. In other words, the song of the soul will inevitably lead to the choir of the angels. The choir of angels translates, whether you are open or not, into an ecstasy like no other, from which no one can escape. The flickering, at the level of heaven and earth, will be named even if the tones are not the same, and have been named, whether by some stars, as by the Bible itself or by the commanders, has been named trumpets. The trumpets are already resonating in you. Those of you who do not perceive the sound of the soul will nevertheless notice fluctuations in hearing as well. These fluctuations in hearing are neither hyperaxis nor deafness, but also a particular feeling of not hearing the words as they are said and not finding the meaning of the words, and yet the word has been heard, but it is no longer decoded in the same way by the cortical areas corresponding to the hearing. You will find that you are more sensitive to syllables than words, preparing yourself for the original vibral language of the Sumerian Gina Abdul, whose primary Metatron keys are known to you, that is, the OD, IM, is, AL. This particular sensitivity of a new hearing corresponds indeed to the spiritual senses, even those which are not active in you, but the transformation by the light of your own auditory organ called the cochlea is today more than obvious, opening your ears to perceptions on what is called infrasound and ultrasound. These change the way sound is understood in your brain itself. So don't be surprised if, in a conversation, you seem to hear syllables and you can't connect them in a word or sentence. It is not a mental confusion, nor is it a stroke, but a modification of the rules of functioning of the human brain directly and of the organs of the human senses themselves. In terms of touch, the fifth sense I haven't mentioned yet. Of course, I will not talk about this tactile meaning for those of you who live the vibrations, because the perception of the body of eternity present is for you now more and more obvious. But for those of you who are not experiencing anything and beyond the painful perceptions at the extremities, you will also notice differences in the sensitivity of your body. As you'll live and know, there are areas of this human body that are much more innervated and much more sensitive, the hand in particular, the head, much more than the feet. You will obviously notice that you will start to feel regions that previously sent very little information to your brain, especially your feet. And also at the level of particular perceptions that cannot be called energy or vibration, at the level of the head. Giving you to feel things that could be called unreal for you, like feeling a draft in your head, feeling touched when nothing touches you, feeling movements even inside your head, that is, your brain itself. As if your brain, as you know, which is not innervated, were becoming innervated. There are therefore a heap of modifications, alterations, transformations of the functioning of the ordinary consciousness, resulting, as I have just explained, in the modification of the perception of words, in the modification of perception at the level of hearing, of all the senses and also of the tactile sense. It is quite obvious that for those of you who have no suspicion and are not looking for any information, this could lead to situations of concern, even mistrust, or even to a diagnosis that unfortunately would not find a solution, because there is no diagnosis. If biological examinations, whatever they may be, were carried out, they would reveal absolutely nothing. Unlike those of you who experience vibrations, because the consequences on the modification of your physiology are such that I can already tell you that all the biological constants concerning normal physiology are profoundly altered. This concerns both the blood and the functioning of all organs. And this is now more than provable and identifiable. The changes in personality will also become evident to those of you who are not living anything, as soon as you accept these moments of unreality and simply accept to lie down, rest and embrace them. And even beyond that, some of you not awake, however, are experiencing exactly the same thing. This could be called a total trust in the light, which is neither lived nor seen. A new faith appearing in you, which I would describe as unshakable, and beyond, of course, the adhesions to any religion or concept whatsoever. That is to say, for many people who are asleep, certainty will be born, the conviction that they are not from this world. Even if they have no proof of it, as you have had them all these years. This is how the call of Mary, the heavenly sign, and the trumpets are prepared in the most masterly way. Coming also in your own way for those who live nothing, strengthen the intention of light emitted by the human collective, to which the light will now respond. Until now we have always told you that the visibility of Napier, like the appearance of the trumpets and Mary's call, did not depend on us, nor on you, nor even on the earth since the earth is liberated, but simply on the arrangement of these different factors. Today this is no longer true. Because consciousness and light follow thought, it is quite obvious that if you're ever more numerous, not to gather to create an egregore, but if you're ever more numerous to turn to yourselves, to your heart, with intensity, with regularity, with confidence, even without living anything at the vibral level, you will effectively and concretely accelerate, in an individual and collective way, the appearance of the signs indicating the end of this way of life within this world. I therefore insist on this element, and it will be a form of conclusion. And I am now addressing both those of you who are experiencing the current transitory processes and those who are only living the small premises of them. The more time you devote to the unknown, not to live something there for the moment, but the more you will notice an individual and collective relaxation of everything that make the links to this world, to these habits, whether they are societal, family, political, economic or other. And this is how more and more of you will free yourself from the lies of this world and the spiritual illusion of this world. Thus, from now on, and from December 15th, you have the total possibility of participating in your freedom and liberation, regardless of the vibratory processes, which you will, of course, join at the moment of Mary's call at the latest. I therefore urge you, in the broadest possible way, to devote part of your time, according to your possibilities, to emptiness. I have said to emptiness. It does not mean meditating, it does not mean that you do not live them to realize the ephonies, but simply to empty yourself. The action of light and igneous fire allows this with evidence. Remember, light now follows thought. In this way, you will actively participate, even before the announced signs, in your own liberation and in the final phase of the ascension of the earth. Silence. These are the few elements that I wanted to bring to your attention, the interest being, today, that humanity, except for the organic portals, of course, will indeed only remake more than one. Soon there will no longer be any difference between the sleeping and the liberated, whatever you think, whatever you have lived up to now, explaining and translating the sentences I said at the time. The first will be the last. Those who want to save their lives will lose it. Those who agree to lose it will find it. Everything I have just described during this speech can be summarized by these two sentences. If there are any questions or needs for additional information in you, and in particular for those of you who do not live the vibrations, questions or needs for additional information, time having allowed me to do so, I remain with you to answer these few questions, concerning, of course, exclusively what I have just said. Silence. If there are no questions, I thank you for your listening, your reading, your presence. And allow me to live with you, wherever you are at this moment, a moment of emptiness, so that the igneous fire may work, whether you perceive it or not. I greet each of you in your eternity as in your ephemeral. I now do the silence, and we let what happens happen together. Silence. I am Brother K, forever in eternity. Goodbye. Through Jean-Luc Young. The Transformations. Transcription into French. Volunteer collaborators. English translation. LMF.